Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Future of Space. I'm your host, Daniel Fox. Our guest today is Susan Paley. Susan is the CEO at Droplabs. She has a long history of working in the audio industry with brands like Harman and JBL. Prior to Droplabs, Susan was the first woman CEO at Beats by Dre. Susan, welcome to the Future of Space.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
It's going to be the first time that I bring the notion of sound and space and the human experience of sound. But before we go there, could you share with us what for you are three words that capture the essence of space?
Yeah, I thank you for asking me that beforehand, because I would have been like, because there's so many words. But I think if you think just infinite came to me, mysterious and beautiful.
If you had the opportunity to go to space, would you take it?
Would I take it to view the Earth, like the famous view of the Earth from a different perspective? I don't know how anyone could not take it, just to experience it. And to feel your relation in a cosmos, on a total, like, we think our world is everything. I think LA is everything, right? But just to be in that perspective, I think it would be hard not to.
Well, I mean, right now it's mainly rockets. Starting in 2024, we're going to have companies like Space Perspective, where you can take a balloon, a giant. I don't know if you've ever seen their setup, but it's a capsule with a giant balloon, and you go up to 100,000 feet, and it's high enough so you get the curvature of the Earth and you get the blackness of space. And you don't lose gravity, and in the capsule, there's a bar and then there's a toilet, and it's a 6-hour journey basically. And so more and more, there's going to be opportunities for people.
I smell a great business.
Yeah.
That's going to have quite a wait list on that one.
Yes. Now, I know that there is a science story of going to space. Obviously, for a lot of reasons, there's a technology story of going to space. But what would be for you the human story of going to space?
I'm a sci-fi fanatic. And so if you've read sci-fi, whether it's dystopian, whether it's the golden age from the 50s, many people believe, you just look at climate change we were just talking about today. There is going to be a human story where there's one level of the human story, which is just exploration, right? Wanting to know what's out there. The one-way trip to Mars, right? There's another human story that's like, we are running out of resources on the Earth, and we are going to need to find, whether it's floating cities, what have you. And it's interesting too, because if you think about science fiction just in general as like a portent of things to come, and you think about how there are themes, no matter where the science fiction is coming from, if the authors, doesn't matter what their backgrounds are, what countries they're from, it's almost the epigenetics of like what we're feeling, that we are going to exhaust the resources on this planet. We are going to have to get really creative. There was an amazing book called The Ministry of the Future that came out a couple of years ago. And it was really, when I say science fiction, it was science, a fictionalized account of science. And it's about the creativity that happens when climate change cannot be ignored, and we are like in desperate measures, right? It started with a wet bulb event in India that killed 20 million people. That's how the book opened. There's nothing to get people people will not move, as you see in Florida, right? They're not going to move unless they absolutely have to, unless their house is floating away. So I think this human story of like, we're going to have to get incredibly innovative, like use technology in a way we've never used it before to survive and to thrive, right? And those are basically the human themes, right? And again, then there's always the edge of like going back to Magellan, which I see you referenced in your, in your background, right? Of like, what's out there? There's got to be more out there. Like, we want to know that it can't just be us. So there's all of these human themes, since like when people were staring up at the sky thousands of years ago, what's out there? Where do I exist in the cosmos? Like, what's my role? So I think they're tremendously human themes, that are supported by technology and technological advances.
And I think it's one of the aspects of the human species that we often forget to to celebrate? Is there capacity to rise in the worst of times? And I think that's what we do best. When it's too comfortable, we become a bit too complacent. But when things get complicated and we need to get out and we need to fix things, we have an amazing capacity to pull resources together and to bring out our brain capacity and to find solution. And I think that's the reason why we're a successful species about, to become 8 billion and going to space is nature has limits by itself. We're not born with clothes. We're not born with a roof over our heads. We're born in one place in particular. And despite those limitations, those realities, we constantly go beyond. We move to new places. If there's not enough food, we figure out how to do it. And that is to be celebrated rather than to be blamed. For me, there's life in general, evolution, nature is messy by design because it wants to move forward. And then the only way to move forward is by pushing those boundaries and assuring that no organism, no creature can just lay in a status quo and be perfectly content. You need to have this tension that forces you to move forward. And I don't know about you, but not that I want to personalize life, but from the perspective of life, it's been growing in complexity for 3 point something billion years, hopefully so that it can jump out of the planet and start, continue in the universe in the same way that it's been going on the planet. I mean, do you think that the humans are about to give life like a big boost in terms of evolution?
I think it'll be really interesting. I completely agree with your point of like under extreme stress and duress, where it is a survival situation, that is when the most extraordinary creativity comes into play. Because you're going to have like surviving in space, living in space, the innovation that needs to go in around that of like, what is the human condition like when you are no longer tethered to the earth or gravity or in things that you're used to. So, and there will be, assuming centuries go by, there will be adaptation. So but we will get there. We will do extraordinary things that we can't even imagine when it's do or die. And until then, it's a lot of hand wringing and a lot of like, is this really climate change real? Is it not real? All this stuff but then this is what this book is about, is like, you can't believe the innovation and creativity that comes around survival. It's extraordinary.
We'll make sure that we have the link to that book into the description so that people can look it up. And I will get it myself so I can read it. Susan, you've been in the business of the human experience all your career. The sound is something that we take for granted, but it's so at the core of our human experience. Whether it was from, when you were involved with Beats by Dre, and now with all the Droplabs, looking into the future where we're going, how do you think that the sound, our relationship with sound is going to evolve as we go to a place where our relationship with sound is going to be complicated? Because in space, sound doesn't move. You need air for these molecules to connect with each other. So is it something that we're going to have to create in specific ways so that we can interact with our environment? I mean, when you look into the future, what do you see when it comes to sound?
Well, the thing that's so fascinating about so you can go and look up like sound in space, right? And they'll say, oh, space is a vacuum, so there is no sound. And then literally within a paragraph, they say, but in order to get information from space, we've created sonification, right? So we have been looking at sound in space to give us information forever, right? Morse code is still traveling around, right? Marconi still has so it's that. Then you look at how do we actually communicate about our species? We sent the golden record, right? That Carl Sagan sort of authored, and he wanted to have an example of Bach's classical music. So we actually use sound to go communicate, to go find extraterrestrial life. Here's the record of the human existence. Whoever's out there going to go see it, right? Then you read about all the astronauts that have brought instruments into space, just as a mental health thing, as a boredom thing, jingle bells upon reentry. So, and the fact that you can listen to the Jove project on Jupiter to listen to Jupiter. So we've been using sound. So it's the irony is there's no sound in space because space is a vacuum, yet it's an imperfect vacuum. And so there are like gravitational waves and things like that that we are basically sonifying so that we are getting information about space. So that's never going to go away. And it's just going to become more and more because that's what people, we're such a visual world. And so people forget about the power of audio and the mapping of visuals with audio is kind of an extraordinary thing. And one of the things that I've been working on that's been really interesting is I come from the audio space. I come from like headphones, obviously with Beats and JBL and things like that. And so what I learned at Harman is everything is about listening, right? And Beats was the same way. But listening is a deliberate act. You involve your brain. When you hear, it's a sense. So you think about in space, it's the mental exercise of like, I'm listening to something to get information, but then there's also an organic exercise of this is actually, like, I have a ton of mechanoreceptors in my body, in the glabrous area, which is like the bottoms of your hands that have no hair and your feet especially. And those are tuned to take vibrational signals, right? So like two of your mechanoreceptors in your feet, one's called Passians corpuscles, one's called Meissner's. And they're tuned for like, Passians look like FM radio waves and Meissner's look like AM radio waves. And they're literally taking, so the AM radio are like basically 0 to 50 hertz. And then the Passian corpuscles are taking like 150 to 300. So you're talking about like bass and sub-bass performance, but we are physiologically wired because we need audio as information. And that's where you're seeing audio is going right now. There's a couple different things. One, spatial, right? Everyone's talking about spatial audio because you want audio to orient you within a space. So you want to know where things are so you have contextual information. In space, that's going to be like when you're in a vacuum, right? And you are trying to figure out, like, just from again, I'm not an astronaut, right? So I'd be the like nauseous, like, I can't pull this many G's. But if you look at VR, right? VR has a lot of nausea issues because people can't orient themselves within an area. So sound is often used to understand like what's up and what's down. And then it's really helpful for people. So they have some sort of orientation that's familiar to them. So I believe audio is going to continue to evolve as critical for information, contextual awareness, those things that are going to become critical in space because you're going to need to simulate in environments that are familiar. And without sound, it doesn't make sense. Like you forget that it is a sense that you need to have layered into almost every experience.
I think that so far, I mean, there are two things that you made me think about. So we haven't been using sound as a navigational tool in the way that we design our environment, right? We've been thinking it's like, oh, it comes to us, but not being in this, constructing a space, designing a space, even architectural, with sound as a way for you to navigate and to experience that. Which I think now with the spatial sound and with VR, we're realizing that we have this a tool, for us to play with. The other thing that I was thinking when you're talking about how we actually have been communicating, or we've been in a relationship with space, hearing the universe, is I wrote this story. I had in my book Field a While. It's called The Power of the Voice. And in that story, it's my closest encounter with a black bear. And to make a long story short, basically we had a standoff, the bear on its hind legs and me on my two legs, just like a few feet away. And it was really a standoff, like a Western duel. But the story that I write is about how our voice is our first and best tools to broadcast our intentions and our energies to the world. Our body puts us at a place and a time, but our voice carries way beyond the visual of what we can process. So I can be in one room and someone doesn't have to see me, but if they can hear my voice, they will know if I'm stressed, if I'm angry, if I'm calm, if I'm afraid, and all these different emotions. It's like our voices are filled with vibrations and tones. when I go out there, when I go out into the wilderness, I always talk to the internet. I mean, to nature or to the animals, because even though we don't speak the same language, these vibrations in my voice carry a certain intentions, and that they can resonate and they can connect with. So with that bear, you know, where it's a lot about who controls the moment, who has the fear and who has the dominance. Voice is your first tool that you want to go to, because you can, first of all, you broadcast that you're not afraid, and then if there's a need, then you can enhance and growl and just, you know, take ownership of the moment. And I feel that also it's the same with the universe, right? We're gonna give information, and we're gonna take information in that same in those same subtleties of everything that's evolving in sound. Am I crazy to think like that, or?
No, I mean, the other thing that's really interesting that's happening with sound is that sound's going inward. So people are really looking at like, so for me, who's not a space person, right? I'm looking at the inner space, right? Not to reference the movie from the 80s, but you know, frequencies, right? So if you start to break sound down and like how sound affects the brain, right? Brain, like space is a frontier, the brain's another frontier, right? Where people have a very limited understanding. And so there's so much work looking at like how are certain, and this I think would have huge implications for space too. So if you look at like, there's research on 40 hertz in Alzheimer's. Does that break up plaque? There's looking at like sound healing, sound therapies. I have a friend who has a whole bunch of patents on an echocardiogram, right? So like to follow the way sound travels in the heart. She was a musician, right? So there's so much that's going to be uncovered around sound and the body and the brain. And that information that they're just starting to really get into now is going to be critical for space. Because as you have to keep people in healthy environments, like, you know, I'm a big outdoors person, not quite to the degree that you are, but you think about all of the healing properties of nature, and to keep people healthy and to keep like, what are you going to need to employ in a space environment that you're missing from the earth, and looking at like sound and frequencies to get people calm if they're not, you know, there's no, what about circadian rhythms? Can you start to look at like certain sound frequencies to put people into, you know, gamma states, delta states, right? Things of that sort. That's really where sound is also going. So you're looking at a lot of like sound effect, and really when I say sound, vibrational patterns, right? How is sound affecting the brain and the body for performance, for healing? And all of that information is going to go into whatever environment someone's in, whether they're stuck on Earth, if they're in a floating city, somewhere in, you know, by the moon, or they're just on a long distance travel to some planet that we're trying to figure out if it can sustain life.
When you got into the business of sound, did you ever think that all these technologies that we have today and working on would be available, or I mean, you always had the vision of what we're living in right now, or it was a what we are is just this new era of technology and innovation when it comes to sound, and it's like Christmas almost every day.
So sound is interesting because it doesn't, when it has innovations, they're massive leaps, but they're very, it's not like chips, right? Which are like Moore's law of every 18 months. Sound, you'll see like standard ways of doing things for 30 years, right? And then all of a sudden there's some huge leap. You know, I'm working with a company right now that's like redefining what a transducer looks like. And a transducer has been the same for 80 years. So the innovations in sound tend to be gigantic or very large, but not often, right? So there's more refinements. And I think now is really thinking through, like when I started at JBL and Harman, it was all about how do you create the externalized environment of you listen to the energy, and a lot of it's energy, right? Sound is energy. So there's energy of live music. How do you create that when through recorded music, right? So it's always like, how do you simulate what goes on in, call it the real world, call it nature, call it at a concert? Like, how do I take that into a digital realm, right? When all of music became digital. And then for headphones, the holy grail was, how do I get the sound that's between my ears externalized? How do I make it sound like I'm in a space? Because I want things to sound real. I mean, that's kind of the holy grail for sound, always like, I want it to sound like I'm physically there, like I'm experiencing something. And if it's just here, it's more of an intellectual exercise and it's not as satisfying. And so you get into like everything like math, right? And physics. And the whole idea of like head related, like there's a thing called HRTF, head related transfer function. And how do I make sound seem externalized when it's internalized between headphones? And now spatial was like the big kind of like, because people were talking a lot about 3D sound, and it really, it felt very canned and didn't feel real. People really understand what good sound is. And you can call like, they have a thing in audio called golden ears, right? And golden ears are people that seem to, you know, they were the ones who would test the speakers. Oh, golden ear says that this is like a great speaker, and it's always behind a screen and double blind tests. And the interesting thing is that if you know, went and next to a golden ears and you had to go look at listen to 5 speakers, you'd come up with the same speaker the golden ears did, because it's really a human thing. With digital and younger generations, it's not as easy because they're so, you know, younger people are used to compressed music. So when you get them in an uncompressed format, it's harder for them to tell the difference. But anyway, I'm digressing. But the bottom line is that we're at this really amazing part because they're looking at sound for so many different things, and they're starting to understand the play that sound takes. VR was really the first ones to do, because, you know, video game companies, TV sets, if you think about, like, no one was buying speakers because no one cared, because the picture kept getting bigger and bigger and more and more beautiful. So sound got ignored. And now sound is back. It goes in waves, just like a sound wave. Like, it's hot, and then no one cares, and they all care about how big the screen is. And now sound is having another renaissance right now.
So the Renaissance, what does it mean? Like at Droplabs, what are you working on right now? Or if you can share some of this.
Yeah, so I mean, Droplabs is really a research project, which is all about haptics and like the idea of, how do I add feeling into sound so that how do I add texture? How do I make things, and it's really almost like Foley for the brain. So if I'm in a rainforest and I see this beautiful visual of a rainforest, and then I have rainforest sounds, how do I feel? Like, what do I need to use in terms of vibrations and energy so that my brain says, oh, I see it, I hear it, and I feel it, I must be there. It's the kind of the idea of presence, right? And the more senses you engage in an experience, the more your brain says, okay, I give, I'm here. And so that's really what I'm working on.
Because it's in, I mean, I have my Quest, my Meta now, but it's incredible to see how your brain is quick at realizing it's a virtual environment. Like, it doesn't take a lot for your brain to go and say, okay, I know this is not real, I'm in a simulation. And from the minute that it does that, you become more of a spectator rather than an active player. So, like you just said, it's how do you recreate, how do you re-engage all these senses so that the experience becomes super immersive, as opposed to you know, watching from a different place. And the your senses of the tactile, how can you have that relationship with sound? I mean, there's a physicality to live, there's a physicality to sound that all these things we take for granted because they're always around us, and we don't really pay special attention because we're mainly visual. But if you take those elements out, there's a certain shallowness to these experiences that we need to bring back, and sound would be a way for that, correct?
Yes, VR companies understand how important it is to make people believe they're experiencing, so that it's more emotional for them, it's more powerful. If it's, you know, a lot of VR, obviously, besides gaming, there's a lot of healthcare in VR right now. Whether it's pain management, whether it's like connectivity, all these other pieces, like the more this feels real, the better, like the sort of healing or benefits of the experience are. So VR understands it, but again, we're like just scratching the surface. No one's done it really well yet. A lot of the quote haptics and touch companies have all kind of been struggling, even though it's such a powerful piece of the experience. Because normally because we over-index visually, if you think about game developers and who are the people developing for VR, they are driven by the visuals, by the physics engine. And the big joke is that a lot of the audio developers are like in a closet somewhere. So like in terms of the hierarchy, that is starting to change, but it's very different. And again, but gamers understand that audio is information. So they're very interested in spatial because they want to know on a first person shooter or any kind of training simulation, if someone's coming from my left side, I need to know, because this kind of to tie back to space, if you think about a fighter pilot and you think about how much information, so fighter pilots, they've already done the studies. There's way too much information coming at them visually. They cannot process all the information that's coming. It is humanly impossible. So they rely on reflexes and they rely on pattern recognition. And so you start to think about like, what are the non-visual ways that people can get information to make decisions, to like activate reactions that are the correct reactions. And that's where audio, touch, tactile elements come into play, because you can't just rely on this sense for decision making. And that's going to be important in space too, like the complexity of exploration there, living up there, the amount of information. You have to think about how people are going to be able to process the information they're getting and how many different ways their brain needs to get information so they can make split-second decisions.
So in the last, decades, we've realized that, we can listen to calm music to help us sleep. Sound is becoming, you just mentioned in the health department, we start to understand the power of sound. So I assume that there's a few, when we go to space, sound is going to be an important pillar of staying healthy, and used in different ways. I mean, like we can, I guess there are going to be ways where you wake up in the morning, or if you feel homesick or something, you get into a room, not just listening to music, but sound is going to be designed and crafted in a way that it heals your body and your brain in ways that it's hard for us to understand how today. I mean, is that a future that seems possible for you?
Yeah, and actually, this is what a lot of people are talking about. I think, especially because you think about how the nature of work has changed, right? And so all of these companies are looking at, we have unused spaces, right, where people aren't coming to the office. And I'm having a lot of conversations like, what can we do with physical spaces, and reimagine them, that they provide, whether it's like immersive experiences that can help with team building, can help with performance, can help with mental health. And so if you think about, I can walk into a space now with a combination of AR, visuals. Let's say I want to have a meditation experience. So again, going back to like a waterfall, a rainforest, I am dropped in, I have visual bleed everywhere. So it really feels like I'm in the center of it. I can have activated floors that like, I can also have spatial audio of like birds that are flying by, right? So I really trick my brain into feeling the floor can get colder, can get warmer, all these things. Like, I'm here. And so it's very healing for me. You can also, simulations for people who are going into training, right? And so this is where you think about like all these spaces using tactile, using audio, using visual, using AR to really, and so these experiences that people will be having here will translate into what's going to happen in space, where people have to go into certain environments. Like I said, especially mental health isolation, physical activity, I'm gonna go run up a mountain, right? Like I'm hiking Kilimanjaro. I'm doing whatever, right? When you have blackness in space, you're gonna have to really play with like, I need to leave this environment and know that I've got more than the physical limitations and construction of a very small ship. But all this is going to be really like, we're doing this now, and I think the best of this stuff is going to translate when, for the people that leave, like space is black, a lot of it, right? There's not sometimes. So if you think about the human experience of like, it's black, I mean, like total darkness for long periods of time. I have a very limited physical environment, and so being able to transport me into like more areas that I'm comfortable with, areas that feel like I don't have the limitations that I'm currently dealing with in space, is going to be really important for the mental health and performance. I mean, astronauts and the first people going to space, they're going to be athletes, right? Because like it's not easy to live in those conditions. So a lot of the work that's being done in human performance and simulations and training exercises, that will all translate into what needs to happen out there.
There's there's so much. I look at my life, and most of my stress comes from sound around me, because I'm someone who is really in like perceptive and in tune with my environment, and this is one of the reasons why I think artists and myself, like I go into nature and I can pick up the subtleties, because I'm connected to everything. The problem is that when I'm surrounded by a lot of noise, I can pick up on these little noise everywhere, and then once I'm zoned in, then I cannot not hear them. So the best my my best friend are my noise canceling headphones. Like, it's, my wife often like complains the fact that like when I get up in the morning, I put them on and then I disappear. I get into a zone. But it's such sound has such a capacity to stress, and but both also to heal. And it's so interesting to see how we're developing, we're our relationship with sound is growing in depth, because we understand its power, even though it's been more in the background. Now we're starting to put it on the front seat, and understanding how it can be more active in our lives, and how we can play with it. And I guess from your end, it must be super inspiring and exciting now to look, when you were saying it's like how about in these places we thrive because we have to find solutions, and now we have the perspective and the desire to go so much more further with sound, that there's this collective and the energy pushing into trying to figure out what new we can do with sound. Correct?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at just what I mean, we're at like the forefront of a huge revolution in technology, right? That's Web 3, right? Like it's the next big sort of like revolt of like, okay, well, we did Web 1, now we did Web 2 and Web 3, and so all the rules are changing. The entire infrastructure that this thing is built on, and so the whole metaverse and this idea of like, what does a virtual experience feel like, look like? There's companies doing work with smell, right? Because again, what really, especially like I look at my son, and the whole idea of, when they talk about people can think in like 3 screens, my son's like in 5 screens, right? And so there's a permeability in these environments where people can like easily come, because it's like, we used to get online, right? And it was like a deliberate act. These kids, and especially when I showed my son VR for the first time, I remember like I showed an adult and they were like, "Oh my god, there's like a cow right near me. Like I can't believe it. This is so crazy. Like it's going to change everything." And my son, who was like 4 at the time, was like, "Okay." I mean, like it was all accepted. It wasn't like cool. It was just his reality, that just he just incorporated that in, like no big deal. So you think about this generation and Web3, and the fact that you're like in all these different screens from a 2D to a 3D, and it should be seamless. And so that's where like there's so much innovation around like how do you make things seamless? How do the borders start to disappear between I'm going in the metaverse, I'm going into nature, I'm still like it. These the next generation, they're not going to care because they need to get whatever they need to get out of these experiences. They need to be architected in such a way that the outcome that you want is built in with technology. But we are at the beginning of like, I mean, you go to metaverse stuff right now, and it was like, I'm in a metaverse thing and no one's there. It's like these avatars that are like, oh my God, I don't have a hand. Like, I don't know what I can do. Right? So it's like, I'm dying laughing when I did this. Like, I did a conference in the metaverse and we were laughing so hard. Like, people are bumping each other. Someone's stuck in the lobby. They can't get in. And we just think, oh God, these are so early days. Like, people are going to be laughing at this like in 10 years.
Do you, we often imagine the future with like having lenses in our eyes that are layered with all these the different options, like glasses, but they're at the point of lenses. Do you think that we will have the same thing for the ear? That it's the equivalent of a lens, but that we also have the capacity to enhance, block, so that basically our relationship with sound will be as AR as what the eye can see.
Yeah, I have always been a believer that we're going subcutaneous. Like, like all this stuff exists on the outside, but getting it like, and this is again going back to health, right? If you think about the constant monitoring that needs to happen physically here, obviously in space, right? The continuous glucose monitors, which are now like, and that's again the first level where it's imprint, right? You've got actual needles in the skin pulling data. They are crossing over into normal consumer, right? But people wanted to monitor their health. So everything, I believe, will start to go, you will stop wearing things that are physical appendages and they will go just underneath the skin and they will be doing continual monitoring, or they'll go in the eye, or they'll go in the brain. So yes, I believe we are headed that way.
It's so exciting. I mean, just the thing that all these new experiences that we're about to bring into our lives, and these new technologies are going to basically transform the way that we interact with our environment, and that we're able to discover that what was maybe didn't have a sound that we could hear now has been translated or processed through a fabric that gives you a sense of these different noise and sound around you. I mean, it's the first time I found myself, back, I would say 5 years ago, you would tell me if you had the opportunity to live until 150, 200 years old, I'd be like, nah, I think 100 years on this planet is enough, with the way things are. Now I find myself that if someone gave me the opportunity to live for 500 years, even if I would be homeless for 400 of them, I would be like, yes, because I just want to see. I feel like we're right we're just cracking open this door to a new world that's going to be absolutely mind blowing of what we think can exist. Do you feel similar?
Yeah, I mean, my son's 11, and so I think even with him, I'm like, what is he going to see? Like, he's even more on the cusp than I am, right? And so you just think about like, is he going to leave the planet? Right? Like, what's that going to look like? Is he going to take a vacation somewhere? It's like off Earth when he's like 60 years old. So, and just the way technology is just a different experience for him. It is so intrinsic to everything that he does. And so, to your point, subcutaneous, everything that you physically wear interacts with all of your stuff, right? Like, everything becomes seamless and smaller, and you just move more fluidly through all these different worlds.
This is going to be so interesting. Now, Susan, I mean, you're a CEO of Droplabs, founder. You were a CEO of Beats by Trey. If What would be your words of wisdom by Susan Paley? What would they be?
One, I think it's People need to really know that they need to trust themselves, right? There's a lot of answers that you have. And if you can calm down, and this is get rid of the noise, when you're faced with big decisions and big, like, you have the answer. You need to trust that you have the answer. Also, you need to learn how to listen. People are terrible listeners, and you get so much information. And so, like, if you, but not just like, but I'm talking about active listening. And this goes back to what you're saying. You will really understand where someone's coming from, opportunities. If you hear, you'll hear it in their voice. You'll understand how they need to be talked to, how they need to be interacted with. So the art, listening is an art. And the better you are at that art, the more successful you're going to be. So I would say, like, trust your gut, learn how to listen, and if things aren't working, where you feel like you're pushing against stuff, try a different tact. Because when things are working, they get more effortless. And maybe your approach is wrong, maybe something isn't working for you, but things need to move at a pace, and you can feel it when stuff is working and happening. You feel it. So you really have to, like, go inward, be centered, be calm, listen, trust your gut. And if things aren't working, try a different approach. Those are my 3 words.
Yeah, there's a huge difference between hearing things and listening. Hearing for me is more of a passive state where things come to you and you just process them. But listening is really like active, like looking out for these cues. And when you listen to people, there's really not just it's hearing the words, but hearing the way that they're spoken to you and the way that they come to you. And it's about the energy within those words and everything. And it's not a joke, but often in movies, and I'll admit something. There's one TV show that I used to watch that was my shame TV show, the one that I didn't tell anyone, and it was Grey's Anatomy. And that was the only show that, like, I would never tell anyone. Now it's out in the open. But I was amazed how Grey's Anatomy was a collective of characters who were incapable of listening to each other. There were so many scenes where one is trying to communicate and then the other one is like constant, like they were all so self-absorbed in their own little world that I don't think that I've ever seen a scene where one is really listening. And it really struck me because it's if through movies and the media that we watch, there's always this reality. There's no model of listening. Everybody's just communicating without listening. Then unconsciously, this is how you become. And I think that more and more we need, like from even in school, we need to give people the skills to truly listen to their environment so that they can be more connected and more aware to it. And I'm sure that you're giving your child the skills, right?
Yeah, my child's interesting. So my child is Ethiopian. And so it's always a fascinating experience for me because I come in with my neurotic, like, I coulda, shoulda, woulda for in the past. What am I going to do in the future? And he epigenetically is extremely present as a human. And so, and the way he lives, and maybe it's because it's, a lot of generations of subsistence farming and things of that sort, but he comes in with a different set of wiring. So I get to watch a person who I love, who experiences the world in a very different way, in a lot of ways, a very healthy way, because he is much more naturally present, which allows him to be fully involved in his experiences instead of having a tape that I sometimes have to stop myself from playing. I'm like and so that's been a really interesting, so I really applaud him for that. And so when I bring in my own craziness, I'd say, Mommy's just really stressed out. And he's like, yeah, I know. Like, he knows, like, that's yours. I'm not taking that. You get to keep that. I'm like, exactly. And the last thing I'll say that, which I think is really important for people to understand, given the context of, like, we're at the forefront of a huge technological revolution. is that it's even more important now to be human, because around all this technology, um, people need to be human. And when I say human, it's like, think about, it's grace, it's empathy, it's all those things that make people human. And nothing is more important to, around all this technology, around all this ingestion that we have, is that we stay human. And that's the human decency, the human empathy, all the things that we can't lose sight of because we're becoming cyborgs, you know? So that's the juxtaposition that we're going to really have to balance, that we don't always do a great job at.
Well, I think we always have to be threatened with the loss of it to be reminded of it. So then we do the necessary to be reminded that what it is to be humans. I'm not too afraid of machines taking over, or because there's an essence to the human experience, and that we, every time that we think that we're just going to disappear into this hole of technology and becomes like machine, there's a realization of what makes it so precious, and then we become more defending on these pillars. Like, I'm always reminded of in that scene in the movie with Keanu Reeves, and the world stands still, and it would he comes and destroy the planet, and then there was a fellow aliens who came to the planet before, and then given the opportunity to leave, he's like, no, I'm going to stick with the humans, because there's something so precious to the human experience that, like, it's beautiful, and I love it. It's messy, but I love it, and I can't wait to see where it's going. Susan, if people want to get in touch with you, you're on LinkedIn.
I'm on LinkedIn. I think that's probably the best place to get a hold of me, is to just shoot me a note on LinkedIn, and I will try to respond in a very timely fashion. And this has been amazing. I'm sorry I didn't get to interview you. Like, I love all the stuff that you're doing, and the wilderness, and the beautiful photographs, and so it's awesome. But I know when you come to LA, we'll meet up and talk.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll send you some photos. I grew up always with headphones. I disappear in music. And for me, music is my escape. You'll laugh at the images that I'll send you. And I'm really looking forward to meet in person, and we'll share a good meal, bottle of wine with some nice music and a
Yes,
nice environment, and we'll continue
love
this
it.
conversation.
I have a place to take you for that.
Excellent. Looking forward, Susan. Thank you so much, and looking forward for our
Thank
next
you
time.
so much. Take care.